OK, we can speak to the Government Minister for Housing, Matthew Pennycook, right now. Very good morning to you, Mr Pennycook. Starmageddon is the headline on the Daily Mail this morning. I know you're here to talk about reforms for renters, but what anyone is thinking about today is how you managed to line up releasing 1,700 prisoners to cheers and bottles of champagne on the same day that you cut the fuel allowance for millions of pensioners. I mean, I know you're a new government, but you got that wrong, didn't you?
No, what we're responding to is the inheritance given to us by the previous government. On the first, but in terms of a £22 billion black hole in the public finances that we need to address. And on the second, a prison system on the verge of collapse, which has forced us to take emergency measures that we don't want to have to take, but are necessary. And we're doing so in a different way, both in terms of being transparent about what we're doing, but putting in place protections for the public.
Have you had a word with all 52 of the Labour MPs who didn't turn up to vote yesterday, presumably many of them to avoid having an awkward situation where voting to cut £300 from some of our neediest pensioners would look awkward on their voting record?
Well, lots of those absences were authorised, but I've obviously not personally spoken to all of those who very deliberately abstained or in one case voted against the government. What I'd say to those colleagues is I understand their concerns, but I respectfully disagree with them. As I said, we inherited a £22 billion black hole in the public finances that needs to be addressed with urgency this year. There are no pain-free options in terms of how you deal with that.
Taking the money away from millions of pensioners just seems rather an unpleasant place to turn to first. Your own analysis back in 2017 suggested that that could lead to the deaths of 4,000 pensioners. And John Trickett, who is the one Labour MP, was prepared to put his head above the parapet and vote against you, said that he could sleep easy last night, knowing that he was trying to stop this measure. Is it not something that causes you to lose sleep, to do that to millions of pensioners? What have they done wrong?
Well, I think that 2017 analysis is not only 7 years old, but was put forward in the context of a Conservative manifesto that not only pledged to means test the winter fuel payments, but to replace the triple lock entirely. That is where that analysis was put forward in the context of...
So what new analysis have you done which reassures you we may not lose 4,000 of our eldest, most infirm this winter?
Well, why we are convinced this is the right decision, and I've watched your programme over recent days where you push back on ministers saying it's a difficult decision, but it's a decision that all of us made with a heavy heart, but we think it's the right one.
Yeah, both because analysis is my question.
Both because there are pensioners who are receiving winter fuel payments that don't need them, but more importantly because we are confident that the support is in place.
OK, so what analysis? Your 2017 analysis said thousands of deaths. What new analysis have you done?
Well, the Treasury will have done analysis. I don't have that at my fingertips this morning, but we're confident, as I said, that the support is in place for the most vulnerable pensioners this winter.
Oh, so the Treasury's done analysis so that you're reassured that that analysis that Labour produced back in 2017 that said that withdrawing this allowance would lead to 4,000 deaths, you're confident there's analysis which shows that that will not be the case?
We're confident that the measures will be in place to support the most vulnerable low-income pensioners, both in terms of pension credit, and as you know, we're taking steps to drive up the number of pensioners currently not claiming that should be claiming pension credit, simplifying that process, but also in terms of the £150 Warm Homes discount, the additional £421 million we put into the Household Support Fund so that councils can give direct support to vulnerable people, including older people, and protecting all pensioners through the triple lock so that they will see a £1,700 increase in the state pension over the course of this Parliament. And if the ONS estimates that were released yesterday are verified later this month, a £460 increase in the state pension from April. So we do believe that the support is in place for those most vulnerable low income. And if I get a chance to speak about it, the Renters' Rights Bill, protections in terms of older people who are renting, and there are growing numbers of older people renting, in terms of challenging unreasonable within tenancy rent hikes.
I understand your frustration because, you're on this programme wanting to talk about something positive the government's doing, but everybody is so worried about what's happening with the winter fuel allowance, and these are the questions you're going to have to answer first. So I'm sorry about that. But just to come back to one more question on the winter allowance, because there's been a bit of a shift in the last week and a half from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor saying this isn't something that you wanted to do, to now you saying it's the right thing to do. Steve Webb, the former Liberal Democrat pensions minister, pointed out there are 1 million pensioners who don't qualify for the pension credit because their incomes are slightly too high. They are still below the poverty line. They won't be getting, many of them, the full basic pension. That will be why their incomes are low, and they're going to lose the full winter allowance. Now, it sounds like you're saying to them, suck it up, fair enough, just, it's fine. Surely you must have part of you which feels regret you're taking away that money from poor pensioners.
Well, as I said earlier, Ed, this decision was made with a heavy heart because none of us wanted to do it. I challenge you on that point. None of us wanted to do it. None of us expected to have to do that.
So you do regret having to do it?
Well, I think it is regrettable that we've been put in a situation by the previous government where we have a £22 billion black hole in the public finances that we need to address this year. And that does require choices to be made about where those savings come from. And as I said, we do think it is right in that context where there is no pain-free option available. And if we weren't looking at this saving, we'd be looking at potentially cuts to other frontline public services.
OK.
To mean cess winter fuel, both because there are people receiving it that don't need it, and because, as I said, we are confident that the support is in place.
That got
and I
through.
take the point. I take the point.
Let's
about low-income
Let's talk about the other issue that happened yesterday. 1,700 prisoners released early in England and Wales. What did you think when you saw champagne bottles being popped, sprayed around yesterday?
Well, again, it's another regrettable situation, and it stems from the fact that we inherited a prison system on the verge of collapse. You'll know at the point we took office, we were looking at prison cells running out entirely within a matter of weeks. If that would have happened, courts would have not been able to proceed with trials, police would not be able to have made arrests. We had to take emergency steps to release a cohort of prisoners. What we've done differently from the previous government, and I think this is important, is not try and take those steps under a veil of secrecy. We've been transparent about what we're doing, and we have put in place protections for the public, both in terms of giving the probation service due notice so it can put in place release plans and excluding the most serious offences. But you're right, it is regrettable.
Fine. A quick question on housing, given that is your responsibility. You're legislating today to end Section 21 no-fault evictions, where landlords can throw tenants out without an explanation and justification, something the previous government said they would do and then found it very hard to do. We heard from an estate agent earlier worrying that the state of the courts and the complexity of this would mean that landlords will be withdrawing properties from the rental market. In the way you do this, how are you going to make sure that this works in a way which actually doesn't damage prospects for tenants?
Well, you're right, Ed, that the previous government brought forward renters reform legislation. We didn't think that struck the right balance between landlords and tenants. We have comprehensively overhauled that piece of legislation through this new Renters' Rights Bill, and we're determined to see it through because reform of this sector is long overdue. We've got to address the fact that tenants can be evicted arbitrarily, that they can be subject to unreasonable within tenancy rent increases. But you're right, we do have to ensure the system works for good landlords, who are the majority of those out there. We're going to take steps to drive out the disreputable landlords, but good landlords have nothing to fear from the reforms we're taking forward. They will enjoy robust grounds for possession when they need to take their properties back, and we will ensure the courts are set up so that they can handle the new possession cases that have come through, the challenges that renters may bring to unreasonable rent hikes. at the point that new system comes into force. What we're not going to do is be blown off course by, like the previous government was, by vested interests.
OK, all
and
right.
put reform of that agenda hostage to court improvements that are subjective
We're not fighting an election
decision.
campaign anymore, so we're just going to interview Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed.